Hey there. Tonight we're going to explore 50 fascinating myths from around the world. These aren't just ancient tales. They're windows into how different cultures understood life, death, nature, and the cosmos itself. Some will surprise you with their strangeness. Others will feel hauntingly familiar. All of them reveal something profound about the human imagination. No pressure, only if your finger feels like doing it. Now, let your mind and body relax, and let's explore tonight's myths together. 1. The Greek hero. Theseus faced one of mythology's most famous monsters when he volunteered to enter the labyrinth and confront the Minotaur. This creature, born from divine punishment and twisted desire, had the body of a man and the head of a bull, a hybrid that represented chaos and unnatural order. King Minos of Crete kept the Minotaur imprisoned in an elaborate maze designed by the master craftsman Daedalus, a structure so complex that anyone who entered became hopelessly lost. Athens was forced to send 7 young men and 7 young women every 9 years as tribute, victims who would be released into the labyrinth to be hunted and devoured by the Minotaur. Theseus, Prince of Athens, couldn't bear this horrific arrangement and joined the tribute to end it. Before entering the maze, he caught the attention of Ariadne, King Minos's daughter, who fell in love with him and decided to help. She gave him a simple but brilliant tool, a ball of thread. Theseus tied one end to the entrance and unwound it as he ventured deeper into the twisting passages, leaving himself a trail to follow back. After tracking the Minotaur through the darkness and killing it in combat, some versions say with a sword, others with his bare hands, he followed the thread back to freedom, rescuing the other Athenians along the way. The labyrinth represents the confusing complexity of life's challenges, while Ariadne's thread offers a reminder that even the most complicated problems sometimes have elegant, simple solutions. 2. According to Norse mythology, the world will end during an apocalyptic event called Ragnarok, a final battle so catastrophic that even the mightiest gods will fall. Thor, the thunder god, will slay the world's serpent Jormungandr, but will die from its venom moments after his victory. Odin, the All-Father, will be devoured by the monstrous wolf Fenrir, only for Odin's son Vidar to avenge him by tearing the wolf apart. The trickster god Loki will lead the forces of chaos against the gods he once called family. Fire giants will march from Muspelheim, and the dead will sail from Helheim on a ship made of fingernails. The sun and moon will be swallowed by wolves, plunging the cosmos into darkness. Heimdall will blow his great horn to summon the gods to their final stand, and the rainbow bridge Bifrost will shatter under the weight of armies. The 9 realms will burn, and the world tree Yggdrasil will tremble. Yet Norse mythology doesn't end in total darkness. After the destruction, the poetic Edda tells us that a new world will rise from the sea, green and fertile. 2 human survivors will emerge to repopulate the earth, and some gods will return. It's an ending that promises renewal, destruction, as a necessary part of the cosmic cycle. 3. The Greek story of Pandora offers one of mythology's most enduring explanations for why suffering exists in the world. Zeus, angry at humanity for receiving the gift of fire from Prometheus, crafted the first woman as a punishment. She was given gifts by all the gods, beauty, charm, music, curiosity, and was named Pandora, meaning all gifted. Along with these attributes, Zeus gave her a sealed jar with strict instructions never to open it. But curiosity, woven into her very nature, proved too powerful to resist. When she finally lifted the lid, all the evils trapped inside escaped into the world. Disease, death, sorrow, envy, greed, and countless other afflictions that had never touched humanity before. Pandora slammed the lid shut in horror, but it was too late. Nearly everything had escaped. Only one thing remained trapped inside when she closed the jar: hope. The detail about it being a jar rather than a box comes from later mistranslations. The Greek word pythos refers to a large storage jar, not the ornate box often depicted in art. This myth wrestles with profound questions about suffering, curiosity, and whether hope is a blessing that sustains us through hardship or merely another form of torment, keeping us from accepting harsh reality. Either way, it's humanity's burden to carry. 4. In Norse mythology, the goddess Freya cuts a striking figure that challenges simple categorization. She rides across the sky in a chariot pulled by two massive cats, creatures sacred to her, and she wears a cloak made of falcon feathers that allows her to fly between worlds. Freya presides over love, beauty, fertility, and war, a combination that might seem contradictory until you understand the Norse worldview. She receives half of all warriors who die in battle, bringing them to her hall Folkvanger, while Odin claims the other half for Valhalla. This isn't a subordinate role. She has first choice of the slain. Freya also practices and teaches cider, a form of magic associated with seeing and shaping fate, which was considered both powerful and somewhat taboo. She's a goddess of passion in all its forms, the ecstasy of love and the fury of combat. The prose, Edda describes her as the most beautiful of the goddesses, so radiant that her tears turned to gold when she wept. She owned the Brisingamen, a legendary necklace so magnificent she agreed to sleep with 4 dwarves to obtain it. Freya represents the Norse understanding that love and war, creation and destruction often walk hand in hand. She's fierce, independent, and utterly unconcerned with fitting into anyone's neat categories of divine femininity. 5. The Greek hero Orpheus possessed a gift that transcended mortal artistry. His music could charm literally anything. Trees bent to listen when he played his lyre, rivers changed their course to follow his melodies, and savage beasts became docile under his song. But his greatest performance came from grief. When his beloved wife Eurydice died from a serpent's bite on their wedding day, Orpheus refused to accept her death. Armed only with his lyre, he descended into the underworld itself, a journey few living souls ever attempted. His music softened the hearts of Hades and Persephone, rulers of the dead, moving them so deeply that they agreed to something unprecedented. Eurydice could return to the world of the living, but there was a condition. Orpheus had to walk ahead of her during the ascent and trust she was following behind. He could not look back at her until they both reached the surface. The journey was silent except for his footsteps. No breathing, no sounds from Eurydice, nothing to confirm she was actually there. As they neared the exit and sunlight appeared ahead, doubt overwhelmed him. Just steps from success, Orpheus turned to look. He saw Eurydice for one heartbreaking instant before she dissolved like smoke, pulled back to the underworld forever. The story explores trust, doubt, and the cruel fragility of second chances, how love itself can become the thing that destroys what we're trying to save. 6. King Midas of Greek mythology received what many would consider the ultimate fantasy. Everything he touched would turn to pure gold. The god Dionysus granted this wish as a reward for the king's hospitality, and at first Midas was thrilled. He transformed random objects into gold, marveling at his new power and imagining the wealth he'd accumulate. But the blessing revealed its curse quickly. When he tried to eat, his food became inedible metal the instant it touched his lips. Wine turned to liquid gold in his mouth. He couldn't taste, couldn't drink, couldn't satisfy hunger or thirst. Even worse, when he reached out to comfort his beloved daughter, she froze into a golden statue the moment he embraced her, her warmth replaced by cold metal, her life erased by his touch. The story varies in different tellings. Sometimes his daughter is named Zoe, sometimes she remains unnamed, but the horror is constant. Midas found himself surrounded by gold yet starving, wealthy beyond measure yet impoverished in every way that mattered. He begged Dionysus to take back the gift, and the god, showing mercy, instructed him to bathe in the river Pactolus. The golden touch washed away, though the river's sands supposedly turned to gold from that day forward. It's a cautionary tale about greed, about confusing wealth with value, and about how gifts without wisdom become curses we inflict upon ourselves. 7. The Norse god Loki occupies a unique space in mythology, neither villain nor hero, but something far more complicated. A trickster and shapeshifter, Loki is blood brother to Odin himself, yet constantly creates chaos among the gods. He's charming and clever, solving problems he often created in the first place. His children embody apocalyptic threats. Jörmungandr, the world serpent that encircles the entire earth, grew so massive it bites its own tail. Fenrir, the giant wolf whose strength terrifies even the gods, bound in magical chains until Ragnarok. And Hel, who rules the underworld realm of the dishonored dead, her body half living flesh and half corpse. Loki fathers these beings with the giantess Angerboda, though he takes many forms and bears many children. He's described as handsome and eloquent, able to talk his way into or out of nearly any situation. The gods keep him close because his cunning often saves them, yet they never fully trust him. As Norse mythology progresses toward Ragnarok, Loki's role shifts darker. After engineering the death of the beloved god Balder through cruel deception, the gods finally punish him by binding him beneath the earth with a serpent dripping venom onto his face for eternity, until he breaks free to lead the forces of chaos in the final battle. Loki represents the necessary chaos in creation, the companion who might betray you, the clever solution that comes with unintended consequences. 8. In Egyptian belief, death was not an ending but a transition to be carefully navigated, and the heart played the central role in determining your fate. After death, your soul would journey through the dangerous underworld, facing trials and monsters, until finally reaching the Hall of Ma'at for judgment. There, your heart would be placed on a massive scale, balanced against the feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. The heart was believed to hold the record of your entire life, every deed, every word, every intention. If you had lived justly and spoken truth, your heart would weigh the same as the feather, light and pure. But if you had committed evil, lied, or caused suffering, your heart would be heavy with wrongdoing and tip the scales. 42 divine judges would witness this weighing, and you would recite the negative confession, declaring all the sins you had not committed. If your heart proved too heavy, you faced the ultimate punishment. Amit, the devourer, waited beside the scales. This creature, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, would consume your heart, erasing your existence entirely. No afterlife, no paradise, simply ceasing to be. But if your heart balanced perfectly, you would be declared true of voice and granted entrance to the field of reeds, an eternal paradise. The Egyptians took this so seriously that funerary texts included spells to prevent your heart from testifying against you. Your own heart could be your betrayer or your salvation. 9. Ancient Egyptians believed the sun's daily journey across the sky was far more than a natural phenomenon. It was a cosmic battle for existence itself. The sun god Ra sailed across the heavens in his solar bark, a divine boat that carried him from east to west each day. But every night, as Ra descended into the underworld to bring light to the dead, he faced his ancient enemy, Apophis, a gigantic serpent who embodied chaos and darkness. According to mythology recorded by the British Museum from temple inscriptions, Apophis was so massive that his coils stretched for miles, and his sole purpose was to devour Ra and plunge the world into eternal night. Each night in the underworld, Apophis would attack the solar bark. Sometimes he would drink the waters of the underworld river to beach the boat. Other times, he would use his hypnotic gaze to stop Ra's journey. The god Set, despite being associated with Chaos himself, defended Ra during these nightly battles, spearing the serpent repeatedly. Other gods joined the fight, cutting, binding, and stabbing Apophis to allow Ra to continue his journey. But Apophis could never truly die. He would regenerate each night to attack again. Egyptian priests performed daily rituals at temples, reciting spells and performing symbolic acts to help Ra defeat Apophis. They would create wax effigies of the serpent and burn them, stab them, or spit on them as sympathetic magic. The sun's rising each morning was never guaranteed. It was a victory that had to be fought for and won again and again, forever. 10. The Greek Sphinx stands as one of mythology's most terrifying gatekeepers, a creature that killed not through physical strength, but through intellectual superiority. Perched on a rock outside the city of Thebes, she possessed the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the face of a woman, beauty and power, combined with predatory patience. She asked every traveler the same riddle. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? Those who failed to answer correctly, which was nearly everyone, were immediately devoured. The roads to Thebes became lined with bones, and fear paralyzed the region. The Sphinx's riddle wasn't just a puzzle, it was a test of wisdom and understanding about the human condition. Finally, Oedipus approached, the man destined for both greatness and terrible tragedy. When the Sphinx posed her riddle, he answered without hesitation. Man. He crawls on all 4s as a baby, walks on 2 legs as an adult, and uses a cane in old age. Some versions say the Sphinx, defeated by a correct answer, threw herself from her rock and died. Others say she simply vanished, her purpose fulfilled. By answering the riddle, Oedipus saved Thebes from terror and became king, though this victory would eventually lead to the discovery of his own horrific fate. The Sphinx's riddle remains famous because it captures something essential: the vulnerability and change inherent in human life, from helpless infancy through capable adulthood to weakened age. 11. The Greek Titan Prometheus stands as mythology's great rebel, the figure who defied divine authority for humanity's sake. According to Hesiod's ancient texts, Zeus had deliberately withheld fire from humans, wanting to keep them weak and dependent on the gods. But Prometheus, whose name means forethought, saw the suffering of these fragile mortals struggling in darkness and cold, unable to cook food, forge metal, or warm themselves. He stole fire from Mount Olympus itself. Some versions say he took it from Zeus's lightning, others that he snatched it from the forge of Hephaestus and carried it down to earth hidden inside a hollow fennel stalk. This gift transformed humanity instantly, sparking civilization, technology, art, and progress. Zeus's rage was absolute. As punishment, Prometheus was chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, bound with unbreakable chains. Each day, an eagle would descend and devour his liver, tearing into his body while he remained conscious and suffering. Each night, his liver would regenerate completely, making him whole just in time for the eagle to return at dawn. This torture was designed to last forever, an eternal punishment for an eternal crime. Prometheus endured this agony for what various sources describe as anywhere from decades to thousands of years, until the hero Heracles finally freed him. The story resonates because Prometheus suffers not for selfish gain, but for compassion, making him a symbol of noble sacrifice and the price of defying authority to help others. 12. In Greek mythology, Medusa was once a beautiful maiden before being cursed by the goddess Athena, transforming her flowing hair into a mass of writhing serpents. The curse went deeper than appearance. Anyone who looked directly at her face would instantly turn to stone, frozen forever in their final moment of horror. According to the poet Ovid's Metamorphoses, Medusa had been a priestess in Athena's temple, renowned for her beauty, particularly her magnificent hair. But after she was violated by Poseidon within the sacred temple walls, Athena punished Medusa rather than the god, turning beauty into monstrosity. The transformation condemned her to isolation and turned her into one of mythology's most feared creatures. She became a Gorgon, dwelling in a remote cave where statues of her victims surrounded her like a macabre garden. Heroes would seek her out, drawn by the challenge or driven by quests, but most joined the stone gallery. Only Perseus, armed with a mirrored shield and divine weapons, managed to slay her by watching her reflection rather than looking directly at her face. Even in death, her severed head retained its petrifying power. It's a story that speaks to transformation, punishment, and the complexity of victimhood woven into ancient narratives. 13. The Greek winged horse, Pegasus, emerged from violence and death to become a symbol of divine inspiration and poetic beauty. When the hero, Perseus, beheaded Medusa with his curved sword, her blood spilled onto the ground, and from that crimson pool sprang Pegasus, fully formed and magnificent. Some versions of the myth say his brother, the warrior Chrysaor, emerged at the same moment. Pegasus was wild and untamable, a creature of pure freedom, until the hero Bellerophon captured him with the help of a golden bridle given by the goddess Athena. Together, Bellerophon and Pegasus accomplished impossible feats, including slaying the fire-breathing Chimera. But Bellerophon's pride eventually grew too great. He attempted to ride Pegasus up to Mount Olympus itself, trying to join the gods. Zeus, offended by this mortal's arrogance, sent a gadfly to sting Pegasus, who bucked violently and threw Bellerophon back to earth. The hero survived but was crippled and humbled, spending the rest of his life wandering as an outcast. Pegasus, however, continued his ascent and reached Olympus, where Zeus welcomed him and gave him the task of carrying thunderbolts. Eventually, Zeus honored Pegasus by placing him among the stars as a constellation. In later traditions, Pegasus became associated with the Muses and poetic inspiration. His hoofbeats were said to have created the spring of Hippocrene on Mount Helicon, whose waters granted poetic talent to those who drank from it. A creature born from a monster's death became a symbol of transcendent beauty. 14. The Norse god Balder was beloved by everyone and everything in existence. Beautiful, wise, kind, and gracious in ways that made him seem invincible through sheer goodness. His mother, Frigg, loved him so much that she traveled across all the 9 realms, making every substance, every creature, every plant and stone swear an oath never to harm her son. Fire, water, metal, disease, animals, everything promised not to hurt Balder. This made him effectively invincible, and the gods amused themselves by throwing weapons at him and watching them bounce off harmlessly. But Frigg made one oversight. She didn't bother asking Mistletoe to swear the oath because it seemed too young, too small, too insignificant to pose any threat. The trickster god Loki discovered this single vulnerability and fashioned a dart or arrow from mistletoe. During the gods' games, Loki approached Balder's blind brother Höder and offered to help him participate by guiding his hand. Höder threw the mistletoe dart, and it pierced Balder's heart, killing him instantly. The gods were devastated. They sent an emissary to the underworld to beg for Balder's return, and Hel, ruler of the dead, agreed on one condition: every being in existence must weep for Balder. Everything did except Loki in disguise, who refused. So Balder remained dead, and this single murder became one of the trigger events leading to Ragnarok, the end of everything. It's a story about how even the smallest, most overlooked vulnerabilities can be fatal, and how jealousy and spite can destroy innocence. 15. Greek mythology, Narcissus was a young man whose beauty exceeded anything mortal or divine, so stunning that everyone who saw him fell helplessly in love. But Narcissus was cold and cruel, rejecting every advance with contempt and mockery. Among those he spurned was the nymph Echo, who had been cursed by Hera to only repeat the last words spoken to her. Echo fell deeply in love with Narcissus, but when she tried to approach him, she could only echo his own words back, making conversation impossible. When he realized someone was following him, he called out, "Who's there?" and heard only, "Who's there?" in return. Eventually, Echo revealed herself, but Narcissus rejected her brutally, and she wasted away from grief until nothing remained but her voice, forever repeating sounds in lonely places. The goddess Nemesis, who punished hubris, decided Narcissus needed to understand the pain of unrequited love. She led him to a clear pool where he bent down to drink and saw his own reflection for the first time. He fell instantly, irrevocably in love with the beautiful face looking back at him, not realizing it was his own image. Every time he reached out to embrace the person in the water, the reflection shattered. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't leave the pool. According to Ovid's version, he slowly wasted away, transfixed by impossible love, until he died by the water's edge. Where his body fell, a flower grew, the narcissus flower, forever bending toward its reflection in water. It's a warning about vanity, about the isolation that comes from loving only yourself, and about how beauty without compassion becomes a curse. 16. The Greek Hydra was a monster that literally grew stronger with each attempt to kill it, embodying the idea of problems that multiply when you try to solve them. This serpent-like creature lived in the swamps near Lerna and terrorized the region with its poisonous breath and multiple heads. Sources vary on the exact number, with some saying 7, others 9, and some even more. What made the Hydra truly terrifying wasn't just the multiple heads, but its regenerative power. Whenever someone cut off one head, 2 new heads would grow back in its place. The creature was effectively unkillable by conventional means. Heracles faced the Hydra as the second of his 12 labors, a series of impossible tasks assigned as penance for killing his own family in a fit of madness induced by Hera. He arrived at the swamp with his nephew Iolaus and attacked the creature with sword and club. But each time he severed a head, he watched in frustration as 2 more sprouted from the neck stump, making the situation progressively worse. Heracles realized he needed a different strategy. He had Iolaus bring burning torches, and after Heracles cut off each head, Iolaus immediately cauterized the neck stump with fire, sealing the wound before new heads could grow. They worked through the monster systematically until only the immortal central head remained. This one, Heracles couldn't kill, so he buried it under a massive boulder. The Hydra's blood was so toxic that Heracles dipped his arrows in it, making them deadly forever. Some problems can't be fought directly. They require a different approach, a cauterizing fire to prevent them from regenerating stronger than before. 17. The ancient Greeks looked up at the night sky and saw the Milky Way stretching across the heavens like a river of light, and they created a myth to explain its divine origin. According to their stories, the infant Heracles, son of Zeus, and the mortal woman Alcmene possessed strength and potential that exceeded even most gods. Zeus wanted his son to have divine powers and immortality, but this required Heracles to drink the milk of his wife Hera, queen of the gods. The problem was that Hera despised Heracles because he represented Zeus's infidelity. So Zeus devised a trick. He waited until Hera was sleeping, then placed the infant Heracles at her breast to nurse. The baby suckled so powerfully and greedily that Hera woke in pain and pushed him away in shock. When she did, milk sprayed from her breast in a mighty stream that shot across the sky. The drops that fell to earth created lilies, pure and white. The milk that remained in the heavens became the glowing band of stars we call the Milky Way, literally named Galaxias Kyklos in Greek, meaning Milky Circle. Some versions say that despite the interruption, Heracles still consumed enough divine milk to gain partial immortality. The Greeks saw even celestial phenomena as the result of divine drama, family conflicts, and trickery playing out on a cosmic scale. That band of stars wasn't just a natural formation, it was evidence of the gods' messy relationships splashed across the universe itself. 18. In Norse cosmology, the entire universe is connected and supported by Yggdrasil, the world tree, an ash tree so massive and ancient that its roots and branches stretch across all of existence. According to the poetic Edda, this cosmic tree connects 9 different realms, each existing on different planes of reality. At the top sits Asgard, home of the Aesir gods like Odin and Thor. Midgard, the realm of humans, occupies the middle region, encircled by vast oceans. Below lies Helheim, realm of the dishonored dead, and nearby are realms of fire, ice, light elves, dark elves, and giants. The tree isn't just a passive structure, it's a living entity that experiences constant assault. At its roots dwells Nidhugr, a dragon that gnaws eternally at the tree's foundations, trying to bring about its collapse. A squirrel named Ratatoskr runs up and down the trunk, carrying insults between Nidhugr at the roots and an unnamed eagle perched in the highest branches, keeping ancient grudges alive. 4 stags run along the branches, eating the buds and leaves. Despite this constant damage, Yggdrasil endures, and 3 Norns, divine women who control fate, water the tree daily from the well of Urd to keep it healthy. The tree trembles during significant cosmic events, and it will shake violently during Ragnarok, though some sources suggest it will survive even that apocalypse. Yggdrasil represents interconnection, the idea that all realms and beings share roots and branches, and that damage in one place affects the whole cosmic structure. 19. The Norse god Heimdall serves as the eternal watchman of the gods, stationed at the edge of Asgard, where the rainbow bridge Bifrost connects the divine realm to other worlds. His senses were so impossibly acute that Norse poets struggled to adequately describe them. According to the prose Edda, Heimdall could hear grass growing in the fields and wool growing on sheep's backs. His vision was equally extraordinary. He could see for hundreds of miles in any direction, day or night, in any weather. These supernatural senses made him the perfect guardian, as nothing could approach Asgard without his knowledge. He required less sleep than a bird, staying vigilant through endless nights. Heimdall possessed Gjallarhorn, a great horn whose blast could be heard throughout all 9 realms. He is destined to blow this horn only once, when he spots the forces of chaos approaching for Ragnarok, summoning the gods to their final battle. Heimdall's parentage is mysterious. He's described as the son of 9 mothers, all sisters, possibly representing 9 waves of the sea, though the exact meaning remains debated. Some myths call him the whitest of the gods, and he's associated with light and gold. His role seems thankless, standing watch forever while others feast and adventure, but it's absolutely essential. During Ragnarok, Heimdall and Loki will finally face each other in combat, and they will kill each other simultaneously, ending their ancient enmity in mutual destruction. Vigilance and duty define Heimdall, representing the unglamorous but necessary work of protection that allows everything else to exist safely. 20. The Greek Titan Atlas endures one of mythology's most famous punishments, but what most people believe about it is actually wrong. Atlas doesn't hold up the earth on his shoulders, he holds up the sky. According to Hesiod's Theogony, after the Titans lost their war against Zeus and the Olympian gods, most Titans were cast into Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld. But Atlas received a special punishment because of his prominent role in the rebellion. Zeus condemned him to stand at the western edge of the world, where he must use his tremendous strength to hold the sky and prevent it from crashing down onto the earth. This wasn't a temporary sentence, it was forever, with no rest, no relief, no hope of pardon. Atlas's punishment became so iconic that it influenced how we speak. We call a collection of maps an atlas because early map books often showed him carrying a globe. The confusion between holding the sky versus holding the earth comes from artistic representations, where painters and sculptors found it easier to show Atlas carrying a sphere representing Earth rather than trying to depict the abstract concept of holding up the heavens. One famous story involving Atlas concerns Heracles, who needed to retrieve golden apples from the Garden of the Hesperides. Atlas agreed to fetch the apples if Heracles temporarily held the sky for him. When Atlas returned and offered to deliver the apples himself, meaning he'd leave Heracles holding the burden forever, Heracles tricked him into taking the sky back. Even brief relief from eternal punishment is too tempting to resist. 21. The ancient Greeks believed rainbows weren't just beautiful natural phenomena, but the actual path walked by Iris, the swift-footed messenger goddess who connected the divine and mortal realms. Unlike Hermes, who primarily served as messenger among the gods themselves, Iris specialized in carrying messages from Olympus down to Earth and back again. She traveled at incredible speed, and wherever she passed, a shimmering, multicolored arc would appear in the sky, the rainbow marking her journey between heaven and earth. Iris was usually depicted with golden wings and carrying a herald's staff, wearing robes that changed colors like the rainbow itself. She served particularly as the personal messenger of Hera, queen of the gods, though she would carry messages for other deities as well. Some myths describe her as drawing water from the river Styx in a golden cup to bring back to Olympus, where it would be used for sacred oaths. The Greeks saw purpose and divine activity everywhere in nature. A rainbow wasn't merely sunlight refracting through water droplets, it was evidence that the gods were actively communicating with the mortal world, that messages of great importance were being delivered at that very moment. The rainbow's ephemeral nature, appearing briefly and then vanishing, perfectly matched the speed and fleeting visibility of a divine messenger moving between realms. When you saw a rainbow, you were witnessing something sacred, a bridge between worlds that existed only as long as the gods needed it. The goddess Iris herself rarely stars in major myths, but her constant presence as the rainbow made her one of the most frequently observed deities, visible to anyone who looked up after a storm. 22. The Norse sea serpent Jörmungandr embodies the concept of something so vast that the human mind struggles to comprehend its scale. According to Norse mythology, preserved in the Codex Regius, this massive serpent is one of Loki's monstrous children, and when the gods first encountered it as a small creature, they were so terrified of what it might become that Odin threw it into the ocean surrounding Midgard, the realm of humans. The serpent adapted to its new environment and grew and grew and grew. It fed on whales and whatever else it could find in the deep waters, expanding until it reached a size that defies imagination. Eventually, Jörmungandr grew so enormous that it completely encircled the entire Earth, its body forming a living boundary around the world. Unable to grow any larger without leaving the ocean, the serpent did the only thing it could. It bit its own tail, forming a closed circle. This image, called the Ouroboros in other traditions, creates a powerful symbol. The serpent has no beginning and no end. It sustains itself. It defines the boundary of the world. As long as Jörmungandr maintains its grip on its own tail, the world remains stable. But Norse prophecy says that during Ragnarök, the serpent will finally release its tail and rise from the ocean, its movement causing waves that will flood the land. Thor and Jörmungandr are destined enemies, and they will face each other in final combat. Thor will slay the serpent with his hammer Mjolnir, but the serpent's poison will be so potent that Thor will only manage to take 9 steps before falling dead himself. Something that vast cannot die without taking others with it. 23. The Greek god Hermes moved through myths with remarkable versatility, embodying speed, wit, commerce, and transition all at once. Born in a cave on Mount Selene, Hermes demonstrated his clever nature from the very beginning. On the day of his birth, he escaped his cradle, found a tortoise, and invented the lyre by stretching strings across its shell. That same day, he stole 50 cattle from his brother Apollo, driving them backward so their tracks would point the wrong direction. When confronted, the infant Hermes lied with such charm that even Apollo had to laugh. Zeus made Hermes his personal herald, giving him a winged cap and winged sandals that allowed him to fly between realms faster than thought itself. Hermes carried a caduceus, a staff with 2 serpents wound around it, which became a symbol of negotiation and commerce. His roles multiplied. He was patron of travelers, merchants, thieves, athletes, and shepherds. But perhaps his most important function was as psychopomp, the guide who escorted the souls of the dead from the mortal world down to the underworld. He moved freely between all realms, the only god who could enter Hades, walk among the living, or ascend to Olympus without restriction. This made him essential for any communication or travel between worlds. Hermes was also the god of boundaries and thresholds, those liminal spaces between one state and another. Hermes, square stone pillars topped with his head, marked roads and boundaries throughout Greece. Quick-witted, adaptable, and impossible to confine, Hermes represented the freedom of movement and thought, always in motion, always between one place and another, never quite pinned down. 24. In Norse mythology, Odin pursued wisdom and knowledge with a dedication that bordered on obsession, willing to sacrifice anything, including parts of himself, to gain deeper understanding. His most famous sacrifice involved his eye. Seeking the wisdom to see the future and understand fate, Odin traveled to Mimir's well, a source of profound knowledge located beneath one of Yggdrasil's roots. Mimir, an exceptionally wise being who guarded the well, told Odin the price for drinking from these waters of wisdom, one of his eyes. Without hesitation, Odin plucked out his own eye and dropped it into the well, then drank deeply. The knowledge he gained allowed him to see events that would come to pass. Though this foresight brought as much sorrow as advantage, he learned about Ragnarok and his own death, knowledge he could prepare for, but not prevent. Odin's sacrifice didn't end with his eye. In another famous ordeal described in the Poetic Edda, Odin hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and 9 nights, pierced by his own spear, given no food or water, basically sacrificing himself to himself. During this shamanic ritual of suffering, he stared down into the void and perceived the runes, powerful symbols of magic and meaning. When he finally pulled himself up, he had gained knowledge of the runes and the magic they contained. Odin embodies the principle that true wisdom requires genuine sacrifice. You cannot gain profound understanding without giving up something meaningful in exchange. His missing eye became his identifying feature, marking him as someone who literally gave up one way of seeing the world to gain another, deeper vision. 25. The Norse dwarves were master craftsmen whose skill surpassed even the gods in certain domains, particularly in forging magical weapons and treasures. According to Norse mythology, these dwarves, sometimes called dark elves, lived beneath the earth in a realm called Svartalfheim, working in underground forges where they shaped metal with supernatural precision. Among their greatest creations were the most iconic weapons of Norse mythology: Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, which always hit its target and always returned to his hand no matter how far he threw it; Gungnir, Odin's spear, which never missed its mark and was sworn on for the most sacred oaths; Draupnir, a golden arm ring that dripped 8 new rings of equal weight every 9th night, creating infinite wealth, and Skidbladnir, a ship that could be folded small enough to fit in a pocket, yet could carry all the gods when expanded. The creation of these treasures often involved trickery and competition. In one famous tale, Loki had the dwarven brothers Brokkr and Atri forge 3 precious gifts to appease the gods after he'd caused mischief. Loki bet his own head that they couldn't create items as fine as those made by another dwarf group. While Atri worked the forge, Loki transformed into a fly and bit Brokkr repeatedly to disrupt the process. Despite this interference, they succeeded in creating Mjolnir, though the handle came out slightly too short because of Loki's distraction. The dwarves won the bet, but Loki escaped losing his head through a technicality. These underground smiths represented the idea that the greatest works require both skill and the right conditions, and that even perfection might contain small flaws from interference or compromise. 26. In Egyptian mythology, the god Thoth occupied a unique position as the inventor of writing, the master of magic through words, and the divine scribe who recorded everything of importance. The British Museum's extensive collections from the Rosetta Stone archive demonstrate how central Thoth was to Egyptian spiritual and intellectual life. Egyptians credited him with creating hieroglyphs, the sacred writing system that allowed humans to record knowledge, preserve history, and communicate across time. This made Thoth the patron of scribes, scholars, and anyone who worked with written language. But his roles extended far beyond just inventing the alphabet. Thoth was said to have invented magic itself by understanding the true names and natures of things. In Egyptian belief, knowing the true name of something gave you power over it. As the god's scribe, Thoth recorded the results of the heart-weighing ceremony in the afterlife, determining who could enter paradise and who would be destroyed. He maintained the library of divine knowledge and served as mediator in disputes between the gods, using his wisdom to find solutions. Thoth appeared as either an ibis-headed man or as a baboon, both animals associated with wisdom. He was also a moon god, and myths describe him winning extra days in a game of dice with the moon to allow the goddess Nut to give birth to her children, which is why the Egyptian calendar had 5 days that belonged to no month. Thoth represents the power of knowledge, writing, and language, the understanding that words themselves carry magic, and that recording information is a sacred act that fights against time and forgetting. 27. In Norse cosmology, Bifrost is the rainbow bridge that connects Midgard, the realm of humans, to Asgard, the divine realm where the gods dwell. This isn't merely a metaphorical connection. In Norse belief, the rainbow was an actual bridge that spirits and gods could walk across when traveling between worlds. Bifrost was constructed from 3 colors woven together with magic and skill, though it appeared to mortal eyes as the full spectrum of the rainbow. The bridge was remarkably strong, able to bear the weight of entire armies of gods in their full battle armor. Yet it was also described as delicate in certain ways. The bridge had one guardian, the ever-vigilant god Heimdall, who stood watch to prevent giants from using it to invade Asgard. The gods themselves could cross Bifrost whenever they needed to visit the world of humans or hold council at the well of Urd beneath Yggdrasil. But Norse prophecy contains a bittersweet element regarding this beautiful bridge. During Ragnarok, when the forces of chaos finally attack the gods, the fire giants from Muspelheim will ride across Bifrost in such numbers and with such fury that the bridge will finally break under their assault. The shattering of Bifrost represents the severing of connection between the divine and mortal realms, the moment when even the pathway to the gods collapses. After Ragnarok, in the new world that rises from the destruction, presumably a new connection will need to be forged. Bifrost captures something poignant about bridges in general. They connect separated places. They require maintenance and protection, and they're more fragile than they appear. beautiful, but always vulnerable to forces that seek to break connections. 28. The Norse Valkyries were far more than beautiful maidens serving mead in Valhalla. They were Odin's warrior women who rode into battle to choose which soldiers would die and which would live. Their very name means choosers of the slain in Old Norse. According to historical Norse heroic poems, these supernatural women would fly over battlefields on flying horses, their armor gleaming, and they would point their spears at warriors to mark them for death. Those chosen would fall in combat, and the Valkyries would then escort their spirits to Valhalla, Odin's great hall, where these Einherjar, chosen warriors, would feast and fight in preparation for Ragnarok. The selection wasn't random. Valkyries chose the bravest, most skilled warriors, those who would be most valuable when the final battle came. But their role contained a darker element. They actively influenced the outcome of battles, ensuring that the warriors Odin wanted would die, regardless of their skill or the justice of their cause. A warrior might be winning his fight, might have superior skill and tactics, but if a Valkyrie had marked him for death, he would fall. This raised troubling questions about fate, free will, and whether a warrior's skill actually mattered if the gods had already decided his fate. In Valhalla, the Valkyries served the fallen warriors drink and tended to their needs, but they remained warriors themselves, not servants. Some myths describe Valkyries as daughters of royalty who had chosen the warrior path, while others depict them as divine beings. They represented Odin's authority over death in battle, the idea that glory in combat might be less about individual achievement and more about divine selection, both empowering and disturbing. 29. According to Norse creation mythology, the first humans didn't evolve from earlier forms, or spring, fully formed from divine clay. They were carved from trees and then given life through divine intervention. The story describes how three gods, Odin, Vili, and Ve, though some sources name the latter two as Honir and Lothar, were walking along a beach when they encountered two logs of driftwood lying on the shore. The gods saw potential in this wood and decided to create the first man and woman from these natural materials. Odin gave the wooden figures breath and life itself, animating them from inanimate matter. The second god gave them consciousness, the ability to think and understand. The third god gave them senses, sight, hearing, and the ability to speak and express themselves. They also gave the figures their appearances, presumably carving features into the wood and providing them with proper human forms. The man was named Ask, which can mean ash tree, and the woman was named Embla, though her name's meaning is debated, possibly elm or vine. These first humans were then placed in Midgard, the realm created for humanity, and they became the ancestors of all people. This creation myth reflects the Norse world's close relationship with forests and wood, the primary building material for ships, homes, and tools. Humans coming from driftwood suggests both humble origins and the shaping power of the elements. These logs had been worked by water and weather before the gods found them, already partially transformed by nature before divine intervention completed the process. It's a reminder that in Norse belief, humanity exists in the middle realm, drawn from nature, but elevated by the divine. 30. The Greek goddess Artemis ruled over wild nature, hunting, and the moon, and she fiercely protected her virginity and the sanctity of the natural world. Anyone who violated either faced her merciless wrath. The hunter Actaeon learned this the hard way in one of mythology's most visceral transformations. Actaeon was a skilled hunter, grandson of the god Dionysus, trained by the centaur Chiron himself. One day, after a successful hunt, he was wandering through the forest when he stumbled upon a hidden grotto with a clear pool. There he saw Artemis bathing, surrounded by her nymphs, her divine form completely unclothed. Whether Actaeon intentionally spied on her or accidentally discovered her bath, The myths differ on this point. Some versions say he deliberately sought her out. Others say he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ovid's telling emphasizes the accident, but Artemis's reaction was the same regardless. Enraged at being seen naked by mortal eyes, she transformed Actaeon into a stag, not a clean, instant transformation, but a horrifying process where he felt his body changing, growing antlers, his hands becoming hooves, his skin sprouting fur. Worst of all, his mind remained human, trapped in an animal body. When his own hunting dogs caught his scent, they didn't recognize their master in this new form. They chased him through the forest he'd hunted in countless times before, and they tore him apart, approximately 30 to 50 dogs ripping into him while he tried desperately to call out his identity but could only make animal sounds. His fellow hunters cheered, thinking the dogs had caught exceptional prey, never realizing they were witnessing their friend's death. Artemis demanded respect, and the price for violation was transformation and death. 31. In Norse legend, Thor's hammer Mjolnir was much more than just a weapon. It was the single most powerful defensive tool the gods possessed against the forces of chaos. When the dwarven brothers forged this hammer, they imbued it with properties that defied natural laws. No matter how far Thor threw Mjolnir, no matter where it landed or what obstacles stood between them, the hammer would always return to his hand as if drawn by invisible threads. The weapon never missed its mark and hit with such devastating force that it could level mountains, split giant skulls, and create shockwaves that rippled across realms. Lightning and thunder followed in its wake, not as side effects, but as integral aspects of its power. Yet for all this destructive capability, the hammer also served as a sacred object used to bless marriages, consecrate treaties, and sanctify important ceremonies. The one peculiarity about Mjolnir's creation stems from Loki's interference. When the dwarves were forging it, Loki transformed into a fly, bit the one working the bellows, causing him to pause for a moment. This brief interruption resulted in the hammer's handle being slightly too short for perfect balance. Despite this flaw, or perhaps because of it, adding character to perfection, Mjolnir became the most treasured possession in Asgard. When giants or monsters threatened the gods, Thor and his hammer stood as their primary defense. The hammer represented order prevailing over chaos, and its inevitable return symbolized how some protections and powers remain constant no matter how far they're sent from home. During Ragnarök, Thor will use Mjolnir to kill Jormungandr, proving its worth even at the end of everything. 32. The Norse giantess Skadi came to Asgard seeking revenge for her father's death, fully armed and ready to wage war against the gods. Her father, the giant Thiazi, had kidnapped the goddess Idun and been killed for it, and Skadi was prepared to avenge him alone if necessary. The gods, recognizing her justified anger but not wanting conflict, offered her compensation. She could choose one of the gods to marry, establishing a bond between their peoples. But there was a catch that turned this into a strange game of chance. She had to choose her husband based solely on his feat, with the rest of each god hidden behind a screen. Skadi agreed, thinking this would be simple. She looked at the various feet presented to her and chose the cleanest, most beautiful pair, assuming they must belong to Balder, the most handsome of the gods. She was wrong. Those feet belonged to Njord, god of the sea, whose feet were exceptionally clean and fair because he spent his time in ocean waters. This created an immediate problem. Skadi was a mountain giantess, a huntress who loved the cold peaks, skiing, and the wilderness. Njord lived by the sea and couldn't stand the mountains. He found them cold, barren, and the howling of wolves disturbed his sleep. Skadi, conversely, couldn't bear the seaside. She found it too warm, and the crying of seagulls kept her awake. According to the prose Edda, they tried to compromise. spending 9 nights in the mountains and 9 nights by the sea, alternating between their preferred homes. But the arrangement failed. Neither could truly be happy in the other's domain. Eventually they separated, though myths describe them parting amicably. It's a story about incompatibility, about how even when people want to make something work, fundamentally different natures can make lasting partnership impossible. 33. The Greek god Dionysus embodied a paradox that made him one of the most complex and dangerous deities in the pantheon. He was simultaneously the god of joyous celebration and terrifying madness. Born from Zeus's thigh after his mother Semele was destroyed by Zeus's lightning, Dionysus grew up to become the god of wine, theater, religious ecstasy, and the breaking of normal boundaries. His worship involved festivals where participants would drink wine, wear masks, and engage in dancing and revelry that blurred the lines between civilization and wildness. These celebrations could be liberating, allowing people to escape their normal constraints and experience divine ecstasy. But Dionysus's gifts carried danger. The same wine that brought joy could bring madness. The same ecstasy that freed people from daily concerns could drive them to violence. The god himself traveled through Greece establishing his cult, and those who refused to honor him properly faced terrible punishments. King Pentheus of Thebes, who denied Dionysus's divinity and tried to ban his worship, was torn apart by his own mother and aunts while they were in a Dionysian frenzy, so mad with divine ecstasy that they mistook him for a lion. The god's followers, called Maenads or Bacchae, were primarily women who would enter states of divine possession during his rituals. In these states, myths describe them, gaining supernatural strength, able to tear apart animals with their bare hands and immune to weapons. Dionysus represented the truth that joy and madness share boundaries, that letting go of control can lead to liberation or destruction, and that the same force that brings celebration can bring chaos. His festivals acknowledge this duality, creating sanctioned spaces where normal rules could be temporarily suspended, but always with the understanding that such freedom came with genuine risk. 34. In Norse cosmology, before there were gods or men, before the 9 realms took shape, there was Ymir, the first being, a giant born from the primal elements of ice and fire meeting in the void called Ginnungagap. Ymir was neither good nor evil, neither creative nor destructive, simply existing as something vast and primordial. He fed on the milk of Audumbla, a cosmic cow who licked salty ice blocks and inadvertently freed Buri, grandfather of the gods, from the ice. As Ymir slept, he sweated, and from his sweat came more giants. His armpits produced a male and female giant, and his legs bred together to create a 6-headed son. Eventually, Odin and his brothers, Vili and Ve, decided to kill Ymir, perhaps seeing him as a threat, perhaps simply recognizing that creation required destruction of what came before. They slaughtered the primordial giant, and his blood poured out in such quantity that it drowned nearly all the frost giants, creating the first great flood. Then, in an act of cosmic recycling, the gods used Ymir's corpse to construct the entire world. His flesh became the earth itself, soil and stone formed from giant meat. His blood became the oceans and lakes. His bones were broken and shaped into mountains and cliffs. His teeth and bone fragments became rocks and boulders. His skull was lifted to form the dome of the sky, held up at 4 corners by 4 dwarves. His brain was scattered to become clouds drifting across that sky. Even his eyebrows found purpose, curved into a protective wall around Midgard to shield humans from the remaining giants. This creation myth presents existence as inherently violent and transformative. The world you live in is literally made from a giant's body, and creation required destruction, transformation, and the violent end of what came before. 35. The Norse underworld was not a single unified place but rather divided into multiple realms, with Hel ruling over the portion designated for those who died of illness, old age, or other dishonorable deaths, meaning anyone who didn't die in battle. Hel herself was one of Loki's monstrous children, and her very appearance embodied death's dual nature. Half of her body was beautiful and alive, with fair skin and normal features. The other half was decayed, corpse-like, showing the physical reality of death without euphemism. Her realm, also called Hel, was located in the dark world of Niflheim, accessible only through treacherous paths. The entrance was guarded by a massive hound named Garmr and a bridge over a roaring river. Unlike the Christian conception of Hel developed later, Hel's realm wasn't specifically a place of punishment. It was simply where most dead people went, a cold, shadowy reflection of life where spirits existed in diminished form. Warriors who died in battle went to Valhalla, or Freyja's hall Folkvangr, considered a great honor, which meant the vast majority of people, farmers, craftspeople, children, elderly, were destined for Hel's realm. This created an interesting dynamic. The normal end of a normal life led to the underworld, while violent death in combat was the exception that earned you a place in the halls of the gods. Hel was not portrayed as particularly cruel. She ruled her realm with stern consistency. When the gods begged her to release Balder after his death, she agreed to the condition that all things must weep for him. And when even one being refused, she kept him without malice, simply following the rules of death. She represents death's inevitability and neutrality, the understanding that most people will face a cold, dark afterlife, simply because that's where death naturally leads for those who don't die dramatically. 36. Ancient Egyptians held cats in such profound reverence that harming one, even accidentally, could result in death. Cats were sacred to Bastet, the goddess of home, fertility, and domesticity, who was often depicted as a woman with a cat's head or simply as a cat itself. Egyptian temple records indicate that cats were believed to embody divine protection, capable of seeing and fighting evil spirits that threatened households. They also served practical purposes, protecting grain stores from mice and rats, which made them economically valuable in an agricultural society. But their status went far beyond utility. Families would keep cats as beloved members of the household, and when a pet cat died, the entire family would enter mourning, shaving their eyebrows as a sign of grief. Cats were mummified and buried with ceremony, sometimes with mummified mice to accompany them to the afterlife. Thousands upon thousands of cat mummies have been discovered in dedicated cemeteries. Killing a cat, whether deliberately or by accident, was considered such a severe crime that the punishment was typically death. Even Roman citizens living in Egypt could face mob violence for harming a cat. As one historical account describes a Roman accidentally killing a cat and being killed by an angry crowd, despite diplomatic attempts to save him. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote about Egyptians' devotion to cats, noting that when a house caught fire, men would station themselves to make sure no cats ran into the flames, prioritizing the animal's safety over property. This reverence stemmed from the belief that cats carried a spark of the divine, that Bastet herself watched through their eyes, and that harming them was harming the goddess directly. 37. In Egyptian mythology, Osiris ruled as god of the underworld and judge of the dead, but his journey to that position involved betrayal, murder, and resurrection. Originally, Osiris ruled as a wise king of Egypt, teaching humans agriculture and civilization. His brother Set, consumed by jealousy, plotted his murder. Set tricked Osiris into climbing into a beautifully decorated chest, then sealed it shut and threw it into the Nile, where it eventually became lodged in a tree in a foreign land. Osiris's wife Isis, who was also his sister, Egyptian gods frequently married siblings, searched desperately for him. When she finally found the body and brought it back to Egypt, Set discovered this, flew into rage and tore Osiris's body into 14 pieces, scattering them across Egypt. Isis searched again, finding and reassembling nearly all the pieces. With the help of the god Anubis, she created the first mummy, preserving Osiris's body. Through powerful magic, she restored him to life just long enough to conceive their son Horus. But Osiris couldn't return to the living world. Death had transformed him. Instead, he descended to rule the underworld, becoming the divine judge who presided over the weighing of hearts. Egyptian funerary texts depict Osiris with distinctive green skin, a color that symbolized rebirth and resurrection, connecting him to the annual flooding of the Nile that brought green fertility to dead soil. His story established the pattern for royal succession, Horus as rightful heir, fighting Set for the throne, and created the foundation for Egyptian beliefs about resurrection and eternal life. Osiris proved that death wasn't absolute, that proper rituals and magic could allow transformation into a new form of existence. Every Egyptian hoped to follow his path, dying, being properly mummified, and living again in the afterlife. 38. The Egyptian scarab beetle became one of ancient Egypt's most powerful symbols, representing transformation, rebirth, and the daily renewal of life itself. This symbolism came from careful observation of the beetle's behavior. Egyptians watched scarab beetles roll balls of dung across the desert sand, pushing these spheres backward with their hind legs, seemingly defying normal logic. The beetles would bury these dung balls, and later, new beetles would emerge from them, the larvae having developed inside. To the Egyptians, this created a powerful metaphor. The beetle transformed waste into new life, made something fertile from something dead. But the symbolism went deeper. The shape of the dung ball resembled the sun, and the beetle rolling it across the sand mirrored the sun's journey across the sky. This led to the belief that a divine scarab named Khepri rolled the sun across the heavens each day, just as earthly scarabs rolled dung across the earth. Each dawn represented rebirth, the sun beetle rolling the solar sphere up from the underworld to bring light and life back to the world. The word keeper in Egyptian meant to transform or to come into being, and Khepri embodied this constant transformation. Scarab amulets became incredibly popular, carved from stone and inscribed with spells placed over mummified hearts to ensure rebirth in the afterlife. The largest scarabs, called heart scarabs, would have spells from the Book of the Dead inscribed on their flat underside, magically preventing the deceased's heart from testifying against them during judgment. A simple beetle observed in nature became a symbol encompassing the universe's daily renewal, the transformation of death into life, and the promise of resurrection for every human who followed proper burial rites. 39. In Egyptian cosmology, the sky itself was divine, personified as the goddess Nut, whose body literally formed the heavens arching over the earth. Ancient pyramid texts describe Nut as stretching across the world, her body spangled with stars, held up by her father Shu, god of air. But the most striking aspect of Nut's mythology was her daily cycle with the sun. Each evening at sunset, Nut would swallow the sun god Ra, taking him into her body where he would travel through her form. During the night, journeying through the internal underworld. This wasn't merely the sun going behind a celestial object. In Egyptian belief, the sun literally entered the goddess's mouth and traveled through her body. During this internal journey, Ra would face dangers, particularly his nightly battle with the chaos serpent Apophis, all while moving through Nut's form. Then, each dawn, Nut would give birth to Ra, bringing him forth from her womb to begin a new day. This meant the sunrise was literally divine birth, the sky goddess delivering the sun into the world every single morning. The cycle repeated eternally, swallowing at dusk, gestation through the night, birth at dawn, Egyptian artists depicted Nut arched over the earth, often on the inside of sarcophagus lids, so the deceased would lie beneath her protective form. Her body was painted dark blue and covered with stars, sometimes shown as yellow stars, sometimes as star-shaped hieroglyphs. She was mother and protector, her body a shield against the chaos beyond the cosmos. The Egyptians understood the sun's daily journey not as mechanical orbit, but as an intimate biological process. The sky breathing, eating, gestating, and giving birth in an endless cycle of renewal that sustained all existence. 40. Ancient Egyptians believed that a person's soul wasn't a single unified entity, but rather consisted of multiple spiritual components that needed to stay together for successful afterlife existence. The most important parts were the Ka and the Bia. The Ka was a person's life force or vital essence, created at birth and sustained through food and drink offerings left at tombs. This is why the living would bring meals to the deceased, feeding their Ka so it wouldn't starve. The Ba represented personality and individual characteristics, often depicted as a human-headed bird that could travel between the tomb and the world of the living during daylight hours. At night, the Ba had to return to reunite with the preserved body, which is why mummification was essential. Without an intact body, the Ba had nowhere to return. If the Ka and Ba became separated permanently, the person would cease to exist in any form. A third component, the Ake, was the transfigured spirit that only came into being after successful passage through the afterlife judgment, representing the deceased elevated to a blessed, effective state among the gods. This complex understanding of the soul meant that Egyptian funerary practices weren't just about preserving the body, but about maintaining multiple spiritual components in proper relationship, ensuring the complete person could continue existing through eternity. 41. In Celtic mythology, particularly in Irish tradition, the banshee is a supernatural woman whose mournful wailing announces approaching death. Her name comes from the Irish Bean Siide, meaning woman of the fairy mound, connecting her to the other-worldly realm that exists parallel to our own. The banshee's cry is unmistakable, a keening wail filled with such profound sorrow that those who hear it feel chilled to their bones, knowing immediately that someone nearby will die soon. According to Irish oral traditions preserved in folklore archives, certain ancient Irish families believed they had their own personal banshees attached to their bloodline, supernatural guardians who had watched over their lineage for generations. These family banshees would appear only to announce deaths within that specific family, making them both protectors and harbingers. Descriptions of banshees vary across different regions and stories. Sometimes she appears as a beautiful young woman, combing her long hair with a silver comb, though seeing the comb is considered even unluckier than hearing her cry. Other times she appears as an old woman in gray or white robes with long, wild hair. Some accounts describe her eyes as red from constant weeping. She might be seen washing blood-stained clothes or burial shrouds at a river, a figure called a bean naig in some traditions, which signals death even more specifically than the wail alone. The banshee doesn't cause death. She only announces it, serving as a supernatural early warning system. Hearing her cry gave families time to prepare, to call priests, to gather loved ones. But her presence was always unsettling, a reminder that death was coming and could not be avoided, that even the most noble families couldn't escape mortality, and that the boundary between the living world and the other world remained thin enough for warnings to cross over. 42. In Irish mythology, the hero Cuchulainn stands as perhaps the greatest warrior of the Ulster cycle, blessed with superhuman strength but cursed with a short, violent life. His very name means Hound of Culann, earned when he killed a fierce guard dog as a child and offered to take its place protecting the smith's home until a replacement could be trained. When Cuchulainn entered battle rage, called warp spasm, his body would physically transform. One eye would sink back into his skull, while the other bulged out. His muscles would contort. His hair would stand on end crackling with energy, and a hero's light would shine from his forehead. In this state, he couldn't distinguish friend from foe and became a force of pure destruction. His most famous feat came during the cattle raid of Cooley, where he single-handedly defended Ulster against the entire army of Queen Medb of Connaught. While the other warriors of Ulster were struck by a curse that weakened them, Cuchulainn stood alone at a ford and challenged enemy champions to single combat, killing warrior after warrior for months, refusing to let the army pass. But his life was marked by prophecies and doomed by taboos called geasa, magical prohibitions placed upon him. He was forbidden to eat dog meat because of his name, and forbidden to refuse hospitality. When his enemies trapped him by offering him dog meat as a host, he had to either break the taboo of eating dog or break the taboo of refusing food. He ate, and this violation began his downfall. In his final battle, mortally wounded and knowing death approached, Cuchulainn tied himself upright to a standing stone with his own belt so he could die on his feet, weapon in hand, facing his enemies. He remained standing even in death, and only when a raven landed on his shoulder did his enemies dare approach, finally certain he was truly gone. His defiance even in death became legendary, representing the warrior ideal, strength, courage, and pride maintained to the absolute end. 43. The Celtic goddess, known as the Morrigan, embodies the darker aspects of sovereignty, battle, and fate, a shape-shifting figure who appears at crucial moments to influence the outcome of conflicts and the destinies of heroes. Her name likely means Phantom Queen or Great Queen, though interpretations vary. The Morrigan is sometimes described as a single goddess, and sometimes as three sisters who share the name, a common pattern in Celtic mythology, where divine figures exist as both individual and triple. She appears most frequently in the Irish mythological cycles, particularly in connection with the hero Cuchulainn. Before his final battle, the Morrigan appears to him as an old woman washing his blood-stained armor and weapons in a river, an omen of his approaching death that he recognizes but cannot avoid. Her ability to shapeshift makes her particularly unsettling. She can appear as a beautiful young woman to seduce or test heroes, as an old crone to curse or prophesy, or most iconically, as a crow or raven on the battlefield. In this bird form, she would perch on the shoulders of dead warriors or circle above armies, her presence signaling who would fall and who would survive. Warriors, seeing a crow land nearby during battle, would interpret it as the Morrigan's judgment upon them. She wasn't simply a goddess of death, but rather of the sovereignty and fate that determined who deserved to rule and who was marked for destruction. In some tales, she offers herself to heroes sexually, and those who accept receive her favor and protection, while those who refuse earn her enmity. The Morrigan represents the terrifying aspect of feminine divine power, not nurturing or gentle, but commanding, decisive, and associated with the chaos and transformation of warfare, where old orders die and new ones emerge from blood and battle. 44. In Irish mythology, the Tuatha Dé Danann were a supernatural race of beings who possessed magical powers, advanced skills, and quasi-divine status, essentially gods, though Irish monks who recorded these stories later tried to reframe them as merely powerful humans. According to the myths preserved in Irish cycles, the Tuatha Dé Danann arrived in Ireland in ancient times, descended from the sky on dark clouds, or sailed there on magical ships that they burned upon arrival, cutting off any possibility of retreat. They conquered the previous inhabitants through both warfare and magic, establishing themselves as rulers. Their king, Nuada, led them with a silver arm after losing his original arm in battle, a prosthetic so perfectly crafted by the god of healing that it functioned like the real thing. The Tuatha De Danann brought 4 magical treasures to Ireland. The Lia File, a stone that would cry out when touched by the rightful king. The Spear of Lugh, which guaranteed victory in battle. The Sword of Nuada, from which no enemy could escape. And the Cauldron of the Dagda, which could feed an army without ever emptying. For a time, they ruled Ireland openly, but eventually they were conquered by the Milesians, the ancestors of the Gaelic Irish people. Rather than leaving Ireland or dying out, the Tuatha De Danann retreated into the hollow hills and ancient mounds, creating an invisible realm that exists parallel to the human world. They became the Aosi, or fairies, not tiny winged creatures from children's stories, but powerful, dangerous beings who lived in their own realm and occasionally interacted with humans. Certain hills and mounds throughout Ireland were believed to be entrances to their underground kingdom. The concept explains how Ireland's gods could exist alongside Christianity. They weren't false gods, but rather a magical race who had simply withdrawn from human sight, still present but hidden, watching from their realm beneath the visible world. 45. In Celtic mythology, particularly in Irish folklore, the salmon of knowledge represents the ultimate symbol of wisdom that can be gained through a single moment of contact with the divine. The story tells of a magical salmon that lived in a well or pool, where it fed on the 9 hazelnuts that fell from the 9 hazel trees of wisdom growing around the water. Each hazelnut contained all the world's knowledge, and by eating them, the salmon absorbed this infinite wisdom. It was prophesied that whoever ate the flesh of this salmon would gain all knowledge, past, present, and future, making them the wisest person in the world. The poet Finnegas spent 7 years trying to catch this legendary fish, knowing that whoever ate it first would receive the wisdom. Finally, Finnegas caught the salmon and gave it to his young apprentice, Fionn mac Cumhail, with strict instructions to cook it, but not eat any of it. Fionn did as instructed, cooking the fish carefully over a fire. But as he was turning the salmon, hot fat splashed up and burned his thumb. Without thinking, Fionn stuck his burned thumb in his mouth to soothe the pain, and in that instant, all the salmon's knowledge flooded into him. When Finnegas asked if he had eaten any of the fish, Fionn truthfully said no, but explained what had happened with his thumb. Finnegas realized immediately that the prophecy had been fulfilled through accident, and he generously told Fionn to eat the rest of the salmon, since the wisdom was already his. From that day forward, whenever Fionn needed supernatural knowledge, he would suck or bite his thumb, the famous thumb of knowledge, and the answers would come to him. The tale captures something profound about wisdom. Sometimes it comes not through years of study, but through a moment of accidental contact. And once gained, it leaves a permanent mark that can be accessed again and again. 46. In Celtic belief, the other world was neither heaven nor hell, but something entirely different. A parallel realm that existed alongside the mortal world, separated by the thinnest of veils. According to Irish myth archives, this realm wasn't a reward or punishment for the afterlife, but a place that living people could sometimes enter, though leaving again proved far more difficult. The other world was described as a land of eternal youth and beauty, where time moved differently than in the mortal realm. A person might spend what felt like a single night there, only to return home and discover decades had passed. Everyone they knew aged or dead. The realm was filled with magnificent halls where feasting, music, and celebration continued endlessly. There was no sickness, no aging, no sorrow, but also no real change or growth. Some myths describe it as islands across the Western Sea, others as hidden within ancient burial mounds or accessible through certain caves and wells. The fairy folk, the Tuatha De Danann, lived there after retreating from the mortal world. Mortals who entered often did so by invitation or by accident, stumbling through a door they didn't realize was there. The other world represents a Celtic understanding of the afterlife that's far more ambiguous than later religious concepts. Not salvation or damnation, but continuation in a timeless, changeless state that could be seen as either paradise or a beautiful trap, depending on your perspective. 47. The Greek story of Persephone provides mythology's explanation for the changing seasons, rooted in a mother's grief and the cycles of nature itself. Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest and agriculture, and she spent her days gathering flowers in meadows, young and innocent. Hades, god of the underworld, fell in love with her and decided he wanted her as his queen. With Zeus's permission, though Demeter was never asked, Hades opened a chasm in the earth and abducted Persephone while she was picking narcissus flowers, dragging her down to his dark realm. Demeter searched frantically for her daughter, and when she learned what had happened, her grief and rage were so profound that she refused to let anything grow on earth. Crops withered, trees died, and famine threatened to destroy humanity entirely. Zeus, seeing the catastrophe, finally intervened and demanded Hades return Persephone. But there was a complication. Persephone had eaten pomegranate seeds while in the underworld, and ancient law stated that anyone who ate food in the realm of the dead was bound to it forever. A compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of each year with Hades in the underworld and part with her mother on earth. When Persephone descends to the underworld, Demeter mourns and nothing grows. This is autumn and winter. When Persephone returns, Demeter rejoices and life blooms again. Spring and summer arrive. The myth transforms the agricultural cycle into a deeply personal story of loss, separation, and reunion. 48. The Greek chimera was a creature so unnatural, so wrong in its very existence, that it came to symbolize impossible things and wild imagination. This monster combined parts from 3 different animals into one horrifying body. It had the head and body of a lion, a goat's head rising from its back, and a serpent for a tail, sometimes depicted as just a snake's head at the tail's end, other times as the entire rear portion being serpentine. The creature breathed fire from its lion mouth, making it deadly at range as well as up close. According to Homeric epics, the chimera terrorized the region of Lycia in Asia Minor, killing livestock, burning fields, and slaughtering anyone who tried to stop it. The monster was born from the union of 2 other monsters, Typhon and Echidna, making it part of a whole family of impossible creatures. King Iobates of Lycia sent the hero Bellerophon to kill the chimera, assuming this would be a suicide mission. The king wanted Bellerophon dead for complicated political reasons, but didn't want to kill him directly. Bellerophon, however, rode the winged horse Pegasus and attacked the chimera from the air, staying out of reach of its claws and flames. He finally defeated it by mounting a lead-tipped spear on his lance. When the chimera breathed fire at him, the lead melted and poured down its throat, killing it from the inside. The word chimera has entered modern language meaning something wildly impossible, or an unworkable combination of disparate elements, all stemming from this original mythological monstrosity. 49. The Norse trickster Loki once transformed into a mare and gave birth to an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir, who became Odin's most prized steed. A story that's bizarre even by mythology's standards. The tale begins with the gods commissioning a giant to build a massive wall around Asgard for protection. The giant agreed to do it in just 18 months, but demanded an impossible price: the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freya as his wife. The gods agreed, assuming he'd never finish in time. But the giant had a powerful stallion named Svadilfari who could haul enormous stones, and the work progressed far too quickly. As the deadline approached and it became clear the giant would succeed, the gods panicked. They blamed Loki for suggesting this arrangement and threatened to kill him unless he fixed the problem. Loki transformed into a beautiful mare and lured Svadilfari away from the construction site, running into the forest with the stallion chasing after her. Without his horse, the giant couldn't finish in time, and when he flew into a rage, Thor killed him. Months later, Loki returned to Asgard and gave birth to Sleipnir, a gray, eight-legged horse who could run faster than any creature in existence, gallop across water and through the air, and travel between the 9 realms. Odin claimed this extraordinary horse as his own mount, and Sleipnir carried him faithfully through countless adventures. The story is deeply strange, highlighting Loki's shape-shifting abilities and willingness to do absolutely anything, regardless of how undignified, to solve problems or escape consequences. 50. The Norse sun is driven across the sky each day by the goddess Sol, who rides in a chariot pulled by 2 horses, but she's not traveling in peaceful majesty. According to Norse mythic poetry, Sol is being chased constantly by a massive wolf named Skjold, who hunts her relentlessly from dawn until dusk. Every single day is a race for survival, the sun goddess desperately fleeing from the wolf's jaws. Her brother Mani drives the moon in a similar chariot, and he's pursued by another wolf named Hati. The wolves never tire, never give up, never fall behind for long. Eclipses occur when the wolves get close enough to take a bite, temporarily catching their prey before losing their grip. The Norse people would make noise during eclipses, banging pots, shouting, anything to scare the wolves away and help Sol and Mani escape. This pursuit will continue through all of time until Ragnarok, when the prophecy says the wolves will finally succeed. Skjold will devour Sol, swallowing the sun and plunging the world into darkness. Hati will consume Mani, destroying the moon. This will be one of the signs that the final battle has begun, that the end of everything has arrived. Even before that ultimate moment, the myth suggests that every sunset is a small death, a temporary victory for chaos, and every sunrise is a rebirth, the goddess escaping once more to bring light back to the world. The sun's daily journey becomes a cosmic chase scene that will eventually end in capture, making each day of light precious and temporary. And there you have it, fascinating myths from around the world. These myths weren't just entertainment for ancient peoples. They were frameworks for understanding existence, guides for moral behavior, and connections to the sacred. They still resonate today because they address timeless human concerns: where we come from, how we should live, what happens when we die, and what it means to be human in a vast, mysterious universe. If you enjoyed this exploration of world mythology, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into fascinating topics. Drop a comment below sharing which myth surprised you most or which culture's stories you'd like to hear more about. I love reading your thoughts, and they help guide future content. Thank you so much for spending this time learning about humanity's oldest and most enduring stories. Until next time, keep wondering, keep learning, and remember that the myths we tell reveal who we are.